That exam took me 7 times, and
Oh.
I finally got it, right? And I feel like I lean on that a little bit too in the clients. Like sometimes it's like there's a lot of grit and resilience that has to be done in some of this work, and like there were days, I'm human too, where I'm like, man, I don't know if I can do this, because just that defeat each time. But when I passed it, I mean, the words came to stride back in October. But now I am a licensed master social worker. I feel like I'm destined for more than that. I feel like I should be with people. And so that was kind of my mom, who was a big proponent and just trying to, you ever thought about social work and counseling? I was like, yeah, I thought about it a little bit. So I made that switch actually my sophomore year of undergrad. And I haven't looked back since, and it's been a great decision for me just overall. I use a lot cognitive behavioral therapy and trying to really try to get a baseline of where my client is, like understanding their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and actions, how they're all intertwined. And it starts a lot with education and understanding how those all play a role through your everyday life. And obviously starting with trying to identifying some goals, but also thinking about trying to figure out where some of those, when we're thinking our thought patterns and where they're going, and how we can identify some of those traps that we do happen, where it's also like those cognitive distortions, right? We all have them, where it's like, sometimes people are all or nothing thinking, and how we can kind of check ourselves essentially, because in order to change any behavior, you got to be aware of it first. So thinking about, we're aware of the behavior, now what are some things that we can do, and then challenge some of those thoughts sometimes too, right? Because that can be uncomfortable too. Is that really a thought? Is that a good thought in that moment, right? And it's some of those times, those sessions can be a little more, how do I use the word? It's a little more comfortable, because it's really looking at the evidence. Is there really evidence to support that thought that you're having? And a lot of times there isn't. And some reasons clients get in that thought process because that's what they know, and that's what they've been doing. And so they haven't been, and I feel like I come in where I can kind of challenge that a little bit and try to find that replacement behavior, that replacement thought in those moments where we're feeling super anxious. But I think it's a good balance for me. And obviously I also coach football too, right? So there's a difference in some of that, where it's like there's a time for, it's understanding and building that relationship with that individual, because in understanding, okay, when's the time where I can really bring it? I'll use that, right, as a part of it being a coach, right, where I can really challenge that, where it's also like that's not what is going to be helpful or needed in that moment. And I think there's a fine line. I think that's kind of changed over the last few years in my practice too, where it's like I think I was more afraid initially early on of like really challenging some of that. Yeah, no, I think my ideal clients, teens, young adults, where it's like trying to figure out the everyday life and challenges, stressors, especially with like teenagers, where I feel like I have a unique perspective from the fact of I work in the schools, in the middle school, high school, talking to teachers, collaborating, working with parents all the time. And I think that's, especially working with teenagers, I think that's a big part of the work too, is really working with the parents and understanding, like, obviously when I'm working with parents, I don't want the kids' parents I'm working with hurting their feelings, kind of order to strengthen them. But also it's like parents need to, sometimes it's hard for parents because they want to save them, right? They want to like really like catch them. It's important, I think, sometimes for parents to stop kind of interferencing. And it's hard because you're trying to help them, support them, but also when the parents are always kind of sometimes overbearing at times, where it's hard for them to kind of understand what the kiddo's going through. Sometimes we have to just let them figure it out along the way too, and help and support. I think about pathogens. Okay, I know I'm not a big science guy, but I read this. Where like they always kind of worm their way in, even in the most sterilized environments, right? So it's better to kind of develop that immune system, right? To let the kiddos kind of go through tough times. I mean, and as somebody who's a young parent of only a 7-month-old, I don't know what that would look like for me in 15 years. I know it can't be easy, but I think it's really important, especially working with teenagers, especially with our kiddos who are a little more neurodivergent, ADHD. Whereas somebody who is working in schools, is part of special education evaluation team. So I think I have a unique perspective of understanding kind of what different strategies and solutions work for kiddos that are more neurodivergent. So I feel like that's why I feel like I'm pretty successful with helping for teenagers as well as young adults